Yes, welcome everyone. My name is Mona Ismail and I'm the president of Aalto Entrepreneurship Society. Together with Aalto Ventures program, we have been producing Unfolding Tomorrow, where we tackle themes around the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we bring the government and the academics together, and we have really interesting keynotes for today. So let's welcome our first keynote of the day, Lauri Järvilehto. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Lauri Järvilehto. I'm a professor of practice at Aalto University and co-director of Aalto Ventures program. So startups and sustainability are something that off the bat might not seem to be like the kind of like most obvious combination, but how in the last couple of years, like in the major startup ecosystems like Silicon Valley or like Finland, many startup entrepreneurs and startup investors have started to ask for like a greater impact footprint from startup entrepreneurs. The Sustainable Development Goals, on the other hand, are a set of like overarching, very ambitious goals that, in a sense, like are almost a perfect match for startups, with their moonshot dreams, with their like aspirations to really have a genuine impact in the world. So in this talk, I'll take a look a little bit about like how a startup is structured, what the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals are, and then how and why would the SDGs, and specifically are the Sustainable Development Goal targets, be almost an ideal setting for startups to start pursuing business ventures in. So a couple of years ago, we published a very popular online course called Starting Up. You can find it at www.starting/up or -up.org. And in that course, we took a look at various ways of how startups are structured. And by and large, we came to the conclusion that the structure of startups typically follows in not always the same chronological order, but like more or less follows these four major steps. So first, you have to have an actual problem to solve. So like for many startups who fail, if not the majority, one of the biggest stumbling blocks is that they start building something that nobody actually needs. So first, like the first thing you need to figure out is identify a problem that some large enough group of people to form a target market has. Then you need to be innovative. You need to create a solution, a product, a product or service that you can bring to that market, to those people in need. Then you need to figure out like who specifically are the customers. You need to go to the customers. You need to talk to them. You need to figure out like how to navigate the kind of like the obstacles they might have in purchasing your product or service. And then finally, one thing that is probably the most like important denominator for a startup company specifically is scale. So basically, being able to grow, ideally exponentially, your user base, your revenues, maybe even your profitability. So these four steps are kind of like the four main questions every successful startup entrepreneur will need to have answered or solved at some point in their career. Now, many of the startups are still like servicing mostly like quite wealthy markets, like a lot of people in California, Scandinavia, like Singapore, whatnot, where people have a lot of purchase power, where you have relatively large markets available for you, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, though, like most, if not like the majority of startup entrepreneurs, at least would want to have a significant, tangible impact on the world. Now the question is, what is impact? It's like like hitting something really hard, right? Like an impact. And this is something that like is often not really defined that clearly in these discussions about impact. And one thing that makes the Sustainable Development Goals such a great candidate for defining this is that they actually set down impact on the lives of people, and not just any people, but those people in particular in the most need, as well as the climate and planetary issues that are facing the entire humanity and the entire ecosystem in terms that are tangible and measurable. So in 2015, the United Nations published these 17 goals, which is the development of the Millennium goals that were published at the beginning of the Millennium to kind of outline the aspirations, which, like, if we were really successful in really tackling these issues that, have troubled the planet, the humankind for centuries, some of them at least. And these 17 goals were outlined as the kind of the Agenda 2030. So the idea is that ideally, in a perfect world, we would have been able to finally tackle these 17 goals by that date. Now, this is not a pipe dream. This is not like just some form of wishful thinking. I mean, Millennium Goals, for example, halving absolute poverty on a global scale. If I recall correctly, the target was 2015, but the goal was already met in 2012. So we know that we can make progress on these goals. And even with the setbacks from the COVID-19 epidemic, even with these hurdles, we are by and large making progress. But having said that, the ways we have to solve these problems, to meet these goals, are not sufficient right now. We have non-governmental organizations, NGOs, who are raising funds to be able to help people in need, to alleviate poverty, to eradicate hunger in the world. We have corporations whose corporate sustainable resources are kind of allocated to these goals up to a measure, but even then there's a gap, a massive gap of billions, if not trillions of dollars that we need to fulfill to meet these goals. So now, startups don't typically initially make a lot of money, and especially startups aren't necessarily that profitable, but they are capable of generating lots of value in terms of revenue and valuation if they're successful. And the Sustainable Development Goals are something that startups could be able to navigate to create and engender this explosive exponential growth that, if we are successful in tilting the sort of the firepower in these current startup ecosystems towards these goals, we might even be able to bridge that massive gap in funding right now. So how is that done? Now, one of the kind of problems with these corporate social responsibility funds is that often, they end up being a kind of a form of greenwashing. So, I mean, it's really nice to put these colorful boxes on your website and say that we are doing good because we're putting in millions into this, education or something like that. And then when you go, look at the actual figures of that, a corporation that makes billions of dollars, putting in a couple of million to to build a couple of schools. So obviously it's amazing to build those schools, but the impact footprint compared to the kind of the net impact of that corporation is usually not that amazing. So, I mean, we do need that. We do need corporations who want to, direct some of their profits into these issues, but that's not enough. And, even with the corporate investing, even with the NGOs, even with the governmental investment to meet these goals, that's not enough. We need to actually face these goals head on, using business, and ideally scalable business, as our tool of choice. So how we do that is that instead of using these colorful boxes and doing a lot of big brouhaha and hand waving about it, how we're now being so good, we need to dive deeper into what are these goals made of. And that's the beauty of the Sustainable Development Goals, because they're not just colorful boxes. They're actually well-defined targets with metrics and indicators attached to them. Now, one of the key issues with any company is how do you actually establish the efficacy of your work, whether it be the business or the social impact. And with startups, it's even more pressing. A startup in order to be successful, almost always needs to have salient, tangible metrics attached to their work. Now, with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals are split into 169 targets, and each of them has a number of metrics or indicators that basically, depending on the indicator, have access sometimes to a massive amount of data that they can use. First of all, to establish the present state of that target on the planet right now, and secondly, and most importantly, what is the impact of your business towards advancing that target? Here's an example. So instead of saying that we're putting money somewhere where people are poor, the target is eradicating extreme poverty, and the indicator, the needle that needs to move is precisely the proportion of poverty population below the international poverty line. So basically that means the amount of people who need to subsist with less than $1.9 a day. If we are capable, for example, building, let's say, a microfinancing business that's able to, push people beyond that line. Every single transaction we make, every single loan we put out there that helps people to build, for example, a small business that enables them to earn more than that $1.9 is actually moving the needle. So that's making practical, concrete steps towards advancing, in this case, this target 1.1 out of SDG 1, and in so doing, advancing also us as humanity, meeting SDG 1 as an overarching goal that we're striving to get to by 2030. So not all the indicators are equal. Here's a great resource where you can find sources for the data. Some of these indicators, the ones in green, are actually quite solid. You can get a lot of information about them. The yellow ones are kind of so-and-so, and the red ones are not really that amazing. So when you're choosing a potential business target, you should probably at least start with some of those things that are in the green. Although having said that, even if you might not have access to a global data repository that will tell you how are things going overall, once again, do what startup entrepreneurs do, aka innovation. You might be able to come up with your own metrics as long as they're connected to making tangible, concrete progress towards that target, and therefore towards that goal that you have chosen to solve with your venture. So finally, before I end up, so how can this all work for a startup company? So a startup, in finding a tangible, salient problem to solve, can actually go to all of these SDG databases and start browsing for SDG, looking for targets that you've personally connected. That's super important, that you have to be personally vested in the startup that you're building. Otherwise, you won't have the momentum to get it off the ground. But there's there's 169 targets. All of them have dozens and dozens and dozens of potential scalable market related problems attached to them. You can identify the problems that you connect to. You can start figuring out how could I solve this, sanitation problem, poverty, hunger, climate change, plastic in the oceans, you name it. There's so many places where we can have an impact, where you can actually find somebody, maybe not with as much purchase power as a Californian Tesla driver, but enough purchase power to make some transaction. And when you make the transaction, for example, from installing a sanitation installation somewhere where kids are currently dying from diarrhea, the transaction, aka the business, and the impact, aka meeting that target and moving that needle towards a sustainable development goal, they become the same thing. And this is what we should be aspiring towards. With the product, we can go and see what has been done before. Once again, so much research is done on this stuff that you can just go online and start researching like crazy and see what has been done, what does work, what does your personal expertise tell you that could actually make a bump here, that make a difference. You can discover market opportunities, target demographics, who are the people these targets are actually concerned about, what are the problems that they're afflicted by, and so on and so forth. And finally, on scale, once you've been able to deploy something that works to a customer base that wants to buy it, you can start expanding geographically, demographically, or by offering your current user base more products, or creating rebuy opportunities for your current customers. So this is actually almost like a treasure trove of ideas, inspiration, and opportunities for any startup to start looking into any one of these 4 steps that you need to be able to resolve if you want to be a successful startup entrepreneur. And given that startups aspire to be scalable exponentially, we're talking about this hockey stick graph, that we can actually create explosive growth. If your transaction and your impact, the influence on the well-being of the people are the same thing. Explosive growth in your transactions, in your business, means explosive growth in impact. And this, in my opinion, is one of the best shots we have to bridge the gap to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Lauri. It was really insightful, and I actually agree. There's many stuff we can still do in the startup scene, and there's still more need of impact entrepreneurs. So thank you. But yeah, next up we have Eero Tuhka from the Upright project. So go ahead. Maybe I will have a more graceful exit this time.
All right, hello. My name is Eero Tuhka. I work at the Upright project, and we quantify the net impact of companies. What does that mean? That means that we were looking at the problem step that Lauri was talking about previously. We're thinking about which SDGs to cover, and we decided to be ambitious and take all of them. That basically means that we observed a broader problem, saying that there's a lot of capital, there's a lot of ambition in the world in terms of sustainable impact, sustainable investment, working for sustainable companies. A lot of people want to do a lot around the topic, but it seems to be fairly hard to figure out how to go about that. There's greenwashing, there's all kinds of different ways for us to look at data in the wrong ways, not look at data, get confused, get contradicted, such that we don't really end up making the right choices. So we said, we're gonna take these SDGs, we're gonna take holistically the net impact of basically the private sector of the world, companies, figure out which one of them contribute how and to which, and make that available for investors so they understand where they put their money into, so that so that people who want to work for companies understand which companies promote which kinds of goals, where they necessarily might have even negative impacts, as well as for the companies themselves to understand what is the impact that they create and how should they basically communicate them to those stakeholders. We formalized this into what we call kind of incentivizing companies to optimize their net impact. So we really, at this point, create these kinds of charts, these kinds of profiles, which go through all the different, what we call kind of categories of impact: society, knowledge, health, environment, kind of a really thought out, holistic view of all the different things, or all the different kinds of impact that you might have in the world, both on the negative and the positive side. So emissions is an easy example here, where we have companies that might create emissions, waste, so on and so forth. That needs to be counted. We're all kind of clear on that. If you manufacture windmills, then maybe you might also want to get a green positive bar in there as well to indicate that you're also doing something good. We're doing that across all the different categories. We're looking at job creation, we're looking at health, we're looking at building knowledge infrastructure, sharing information, mental health, kind of, you name it, we have it. Basically, I would say the SDGs are very comprehensive. It's hard to come up with stuff that's not on there. And my view is that kind of the net impact view that we have is kind of almost as exhaustive, if not equally so. We've talked about SDGs here. That's basically the theme. So now the question is, why are we looking at net impact? From our point of view, this is what we started to work with. But as we've looked at the industry, we've kind of observed that a lot of companies are really interested in SDGs. That's basically a taxonomy that they're familiar with. EU regulation is another kind of point where different ways to measure impact and report on that are coming up. So it's basically now multiple different standards, different lenses added. We basically said, kind of, let's keep net impact at the core. We think that's kind of the right way to kind of pull everything together, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't kind of look through at the lenses of, say, SDGs. So how do we think about SDGs? I think Lauri well mentioned that there's kind of this sticker game going on with a lot of companies where they say, here is a small fraction of our business that you could say contributes to this SDG, so we're going to stack that sticker on our website. And I think there is a well-known oil manufacturer or oil and gas company that on their website state that they positively contribute to, I think, 13 or 14 of the 17 SDGs, which might be true, but if that is actually how you should understand the business is another question. So we basically said, we like this way of looking at things. We can probably look at SDGs in a similar fashion. We do that by kind of really going through each company that we report on, look at what fraction of their business contributes somewhat to an SDG, contributes kind of strongly, or then might actually be detrimental to one of those. So this gives you actually a holistic view across all of those SDGs, a proper profile of like what are you getting and what are you paying for it, basically. That's basically it from my side. I'm happy to talk about net impact today. I'm happy to talk about SDGs. I'm happy to talk about all different ways that we can look at impact. I really think it's important. We work hard to get that done. I think it's clear that investors, companies, the public sector needs to start looking into this more and more and kind of start to build proper quantifiable ways to make better educated decisions about impact. That's it from me. Thank you, guys.
Yes. So thank you, Eero Tuhka, for the presentation. It was good that you mentioned about the net impact. So next up, we have Kai Mykkänen representing from the Kokoomus Party. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot, and probably representing all the Finnish Parliament here today. I remember when I first became interested about society and how to influence on our future society. So, in other words, politics. It was about 25 years ago, high school years, and my reason was exactly that: how to combine responsibility about environment and market economy, because I believed in both. Market economy, its creativity and its individualism, and on the other hand, I was, for some reasons, very keen on thinking about those days acid rains and ozone layer problems and already emerging concern about climate change because of greenhouse gases as well. So I'm very happy to see young, bright minds gathering around responsibility and especially around the puzzle of how to combine market economy and environmental responsibility. And however, I would define the core question then as also as an economist on my education would be that I would say that the goal is in sustainability that market incentives include all the externalities and create also a income distribution which is fair. And who has the responsibility? You also had this kind of fundamental question in your material about this event. So I would definitely say that the government and democracy, so the population, has the responsibility to fix the incentives in the market. So I would say that the entrepreneurs and companies, they, in the end, their core meaning is to optimize long-term profits, and then it's mainly responsibility of the government and the democracy to fix the incentives so that they bear also the costs of negative externalities, and also that the income distribution that the market economy is creating is fair enough. What are the main actions then? Well, for me, it's always has been mainly about emission pricing, because I believe in creativity of the market and in cost efficiency of the market and private owners in choosing the tools and prioritizing investment locations and projects. So always, if possible, I would more like to use pricing incentives than to ban some technology. Though I'm probably the father of the banning law of coal heating and electricity production in Finland. So 5 years ago, I was pushing through the government negotiations and then through the parliament the legislation that will ban usage of hard coal in the Finnish power plants by 2029, because those days it looked like the carbon pricing is not coming fast enough, and we have to use so-called second best tools because the market pricing is unavailable to be used efficiently enough. And just in time, actually, this slide, which I wanted to show because I noticed in these pre-questions that there was some frustrations that how would young generation be able to stay positive if you think that not enough is done. And one piece of optimism, which is very important one, I would suggest you to remember this curve with blue color here, if you see from the monitors, because I would argue that by far the most important climate action in Europe during this century so far has been the EU carbon dioxide emission pricing system, and the fact that we have been able to restore it as an effective tool during past 4 years. Because the main problem 10 years ago, and still actually 5 years ago in 2017 or 2016, when I became a minister of past government, was that, as you can see, emissions were trading below 10 euros per carbon ton. And that price was not driving change. It was driving halt of change, and it was driving just staying in fossil fuels. But fortunately enough, certain fixed tools that the Commission, together with the governments, was able to push through already in 2018-19, and then very meaningfully the new Fit for 55% emission diminishing target by 2030 has actually now skyrocketed the EU emission trading price from about 5 euros per ton now above 60 euros per ton. And nobody could have been actually anticipating this 2 years ago. And now actually this EU emission pricing is by far the most effective reason why main emission producers, so power plant owners and energy, also industrial sector, are fast finding ways to invest in alternative techniques which are not tied to fossil fuels at all. Have we done anything in the Finnish parliament then? Well, this graph, unfortunately, it's partly in Finnish, but it tells about Finnish national heat fuel taxes. So when you see the pipes of the power plants here in Espoo or Helsinki, for example, Salmisaari between Helsinki Center and Otaniemi, these power plants operate basically so that they optimize different fuels, giving the information of the market. And there actually we've been able to multiply also the CO2 pricing in our national heat fuel taxes during past 10 years, as you can see from the graph. So the highest one is coal, and then there is heating oil, natural gas, so forth. The green line is actually peat, which is a pity thing that peat has been an exception here, and we've been politically unable to rise the emission price of peat because it's a domestic fuel, and there has been two strong political powers against increasing price of using peat. Fortunately, now also the EU emission trading price hits also peat, and actually the problem of peat is soon over. During this decade, we will get rid of coal, peat, and mostly also about natural gas in Finland. So this is very fast changing. One thing which needs attention, of course, is transport. And there, as you can see, fuel pricing has been much more stable. I don't go to details of this slide, but it's basically about benzene and diesel taxation compared to consumer price index. So there we have been not doing so much with prices. Fortunately enough, we've been using other incentives, particularly EU standards for the average emissions of new sold cars in Europe. And that's been the most efficient target, which has made main automotive producers investing very heavily to electric cars in Europe. And now it's actually driving a change where I would also argue that during this decade we will switch into world where at least in the Western economies, most of the sold new cars will be independent of burning of any fuels at all. Very important step forward. So don't be too pessimistic, even if many times it looks like that nothing is happening, but pricing of CO2 in Europe has been multiplied by 10 during past 4 years for large industry and power plants. Also in Finland, we've been able to multiply our domestic taxes for fossil heat fuels, and actually also in transportation things are going forward, mainly because of the EU standards as main policy tool. Still, of course, much needs to be done, and I hope that as politicians we are bold enough and we have courage to take the lead and support those entrepreneurs who also want to go forward and be the first ones to find solutions for these problems, so that we create the incentives. And I think that the main bottleneck is currently that we lack enough certainty about how the incentives will be in 10 years' time from now on. And that's why also still quite many large corps, they tend to have too short strategy horizon to be actually capturing the real possibilities that are not yet fully mature technologies, but would need more and more R&D and bold investments. So probably we would need us politicians to not only to carry changes in taxes and incentives, but to be able to do it so that you actually already see how things will be in 2030s. And that's quite a challenge for policymakers, because democracy usually lives in very short periods as well. So here are some ideas, and I encourage you to go forward with your ambitions, and looking forward for the panel discussion as well. Thanks.
Yes, so thank you, Kai Mykkänen. It has been really insightful to listen different angles. Usually I just hear the startup view. So it's great to also hear about companies that specializes in researching the SDGs, and also the academia and the government view of things. So I hope that this also gave you guys new insights and inspirations to tackle these issues. We will have a short break, but before we go to the break, I just want to remind you guys you can ask questions live, so keep the questions coming. And after the short break, we will have a panel discussion. So we will also have the opportunity to take in your questions. So see you soon. We will start with our panel discussion. So the first question to the panel is that as you guys were mentioning about SDGs, it would be really good to hear what is your view of SDGs. So what is SDGs? If you can summarize it in 30 seconds. Maybe you first.
My personal concentration is to environmental responsibility. So basically, that we don't create emissions and destroy the future of our children.
That's short enough.
20 seconds.
Yeah, that's really good. What about you, Lauri?
Well, I mean, I see them like probably like from my talk, you could read it as well, like great opportunity for especially entrepreneurs to really solve the problems in the world. And I think like the other thing is like, you know, that there's so much of this kind of empty impact talk that they can actually like substantiate so much of that impact talk. And I really appreciate the work that has been done to introduce them and to substantiate them.
What about you, Eero?
I think they're a very good start in the sense that they're really comprehensive, as I kind of mentioned as well. I think it's hard to come up with stuff that's not on there. It's hard to say that, you know, progressing on any of these would be not worthy.
Yeah.
So like clearly a good start. I think where we can do more and where we kind of should take this forward with is really coming up with a more kind of discriminative model of like what actually contributes and what necessarily doesn't, so we can really critically look at where should money go, where should effort go, and what is kind of the best investment to maximize all of those goals or to reach those goals as a kind of global economy.
Okay. Follow-up question, there was a mention about net impact. So what does the concept net impact refer to? And actually I'm not going to ask you, Eero, so Kai.
Well, it usually refers to the fact that if you have a company or if you think about your family, that okay, if you create positive externalities and negative externalities to the society and environment, then basically the net will be more positive. So if your car uses fossil fuels for transportation, then you should do something that has a measurable positive impact, and that's why we probably need this kind of companies who can then calculate what's the net impact that actually is.
Do you have anything to add, Lauri?
Well, I think that was a pretty comprehensive answer. So, yeah.
Yes. So who do you see has the responsibility to make the change and drive for the SDGs? And let me ask Lauri first.
What's the change?
Yeah. So who do you see has the responsibility to make the change? So we were talking a lot about SDGs and the problems, but who actually has the responsibility?
We do. I mean, first and foremost, I think like, you know, and by we I mean specifically us four here, but like, you know, and pretty much everybody in this room, I would venture to guess most of the people listening. So us who have already like so much in terms of privilege, so much in terms of like, you know, having had these opportunities to like, you know, get great education, like, you know, live in a secure country and so on and so forth. So I think there's like, you know, because basically human potential is universal, but opportunity is not. So those of us who have been like, you know, given the opportunities, I think we have a direct causal ethical responsibility to do whatever we can in order to that we can ensure the better opportunities for those who don't have it right now. The kind of like, you know, the more convoluted answer is that I think there's like specifically those actors that are at least claiming to, you know, have some kind of an impact or even positive net impact in the world. I think they really do need to start putting their money where their mouths are. And like, you know, for example, this unnamed company whose website I actually had on my slides, unnamed also. So like, you know, I mean, like somebody puts that, like they actually have all 17 boxes.
They do?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so if you're talking about the same unnamed company that I am, and that's just like, you know, nuts. And like, you know, that's the point. Like, you know, you really have to dig deeper. You have to ask what are the concrete steps that you're taking to advancing these specific goals. And it's not just like, you know, that, you know, you take out your trash and it's like, you know, oh, okay, I'm making climate impact. Well, sort of, yeah, but you're not actually hitting that specific target that's advancing, for example, something like SDG 13 or whatever. So like, you know, that's why I mean, like, I think we all who have these privileges, we have an ethical responsibility to go out the door and figure out what we can do. But those people who are specifically saying that they are already doing these steps, they really need to, like, you know, put their money where their mouths are.
I think that was a really good answer, but thinking also today, like you're representing a company, academia, government, and the startup scene. So what do you think that you can do in the academic field to inspire students to actually tackle these issues? Same with like companies, what can you do with the government and the startup scene? So can you add on to that, like in the academics, how can we inspire the students to take responsibility?
Well, I would actually want to latch on to something that Kai said in his keynote, like, you know, that that we're not going to solve these by like shaking our fingers at people, which I sort of just did. But anyway, so I think the important thing is for academics and for researchers is really to dive deep and look what are the opportunities here. And the opportunity, I've just scratched the surface in my own research, and I would already venture to say that the opportunities are like tremendous. So what I would encourage is for researchers to dive deeper into individual SDGs and try to figure out what are the business interfaces, what are the business opportunities, market sizes, you name it. I mean, just figure out what is the landscape like. And then, what we're doing in the Aalto Ventures program is trying to figure out how to interface with our students in a way that that people are excited about building their own ventures. So then bridging these two worlds and giving our students understanding that first of all, you actually can make a difference. Second of all, if you find those interfaces, you can you can both make a difference and make an insanely successful business out of that. And I think those things are at least some ways that the academia can be of service to to startups, to government, corporations, all of these different actors by figuring out what actually works, what doesn't, and trying to disseminate that information as well as expediently as possible.
What about the government side?
Well, I think the main thing is that we have to create a stable enough long-term view where everybody knows that the cost of creating emissions will increase, and that incentivizes you to choose the other way and use your brain to create other kind of future. Harder then is how to define the incentives and calculate the costs of let's say worsening the biodiversity of the globe, for instance, and there we will need, I think, also academic work quite much, that how, for instance, in Finland we should price the biodiversity of our forests and how we should incentivize, for example, 600,000 forest owners to maintain more biodiversity in our forest, because that has a external value for the society.
What about you, Eero? The Upright Project knows, or you help already companies to take more responsibility by publishing those kind of numbers. So what do you think, how can companies take more responsibility towards the SDGs?
Right. I think that's a very good question, and for me it would be really around recognizing the long-term view here. So what I really like to kind of think about in terms of impact is that's really a very long-term leading indicator of your performance as a company. If you work on kind of sustainable activities that will have a future in this world, you will probably also see a successful business, as you were talking about, grow out of that. If you, on the other hand, work on products and services that will likely not create a positive impact, or even creates a fairly negative impact, I'm sure that kind of latest at the stage at which guys and friends are going to make the environment of that business not particularly conductive, you're going to have a hard time. So kind of sooner or later you're going to have a hard time recruiting, you're going to have a hard time finding out kind of a regulatory framework that accepts that kind of business. So you should kind of just at this moment accept kind of sustainability as a long-term, or recognize sustainability as a long-term indicator of your business.
Good answer. Just to shift the gear a little bit, carbon tax. So is it coming, and if not, why?
Well, I already actually tried to say in my keynote that actually we have a carbon tax in Europe already since 2004, and actually fortunately enough, and that's actually quite weirdly probably, but one of the main things which I'm happy about during past 4 years is that the price of carbon has been skyrocketing in Europe, and that has actually had a tremendous effect on investment plans in power sector and industry sector, and fortunately enough that's not under national parliament decisions, because otherwise probably it would have been hindered since the price has been coming up so much. But still, of course, we have certain areas where things are not working like this. For instance, the residential buildings which have their own like oil heating, they are not in carbon tax system. They should probably be there. We have national tax on heating oil, but that's not yet high enough, even if I've been personally also 4 times involved in increasing it. And then especially the indirect emissions from land usage. So this is a peculiar field, especially when we come to so-called peat farms or peat like land, which different kind of usage of that land actually creates quite significant part of our emissions, especially in 2030 when industrial emissions will be half of what they are currently. So these kind of things are now hot on parliament agenda as well, and especially in European level, and they should be there hot. So these are the things where we need more carbon pricing in land usage.
Great, thank you. So this question is for everyone. Many think that sustainability, entrepreneurship, these words are kind of fuzzy and hand waving. So what do sustainability and entrepreneurship respectfully mean to you?
Well, entrepreneurship for me at least it means that you try to stand on your own feet and create something new and be a successful entrepreneur to create actually something which is sustainable, so that it can actually pay for its costs with its sales. So that's basically the definition of entrepreneurship, and then tied to sustainability is that then you try to be net positive in externalities, actually what you create for the society. And I'm very glad that during past 20 years, I think that also in this sphere of students in Otaniemi and in technological and commercial field in Finland, the idea of eagering to be net positive in entrepreneurship has been growing and is more important than 10 years ago. So probably that means that we will have a nice future.
What about you, Lauri?
My definition of sustainability is quantifiable change for the better in the well-being of people, the planet and the ecosystem. So basically being able to create positive change, social and ecological change. And which is, by the way, interesting because it doesn't actually have the kind of like, the etymological function of sustainability, something that can be sustained. But it's kind of like, it is actually like, an increase in the well-being, which is, I think, what we should strive towards. And entrepreneurship, I'm actually quite keen now on this definition of entrepreneurship as being defined by your direction with respect to problems. So, because entrepreneurship is not just about being a founder or starting your own company. You can be an entrepreneur. Like, I would venture to say that Kai is quite entrepreneurial. Like, as a politician, having driven significant changes for the better in our society. So in that sense, I think entrepreneurship, by definition, is how you relate towards problems. And people who are not entrepreneurial see problems as something to avoid, something to run away from. People who are entrepreneurial see problems as opportunities to create something new. Somebody has a problem. Maybe I can do something about it. I can make a difference. I can. Maybe you can build a business around it. But by and large, regardless of whether you are an entrepreneur or you have this, what at Aalto we call the entrepreneurial mindset. I think the definition is how you relate towards problems. And if you approach problems, then you are entrepreneurial. That's my favorite definition.
That's a good definition. What about you, Eero?
Right. All right. So my definition for sustainability first kind of comes back to the long-termism for me as well. So it's not really about measuring short-term kind of benefits and short-term well-being of people. It's really about measuring that over a longer period of time, making sure that kind of what you're doing is not just kind of warming you up right now, but just kind of creating something that works 50, 100, 200 years from now, which I think at this point is kind of starting to be more and more acute of a problem. Entrepreneurship for me is really about basically what you said, innovation, about coming up with new creative ways to solve problems that you have. In terms of nature of entrepreneurship, I think it's kind of clearly going more towards solving sustainability problems, because a lot of the kind of short-term things we've kind of figured out. We know how to power cars. Now we need to figure out how we can power them such that we have cars in 100 years. So really kind of this forum being one of those examples of this kind of being the direction, looking at sustainable investment, all of that stuff. I think it's a clear indication that that's where innovation and that's where entrepreneurship is going. So for me, entrepreneurship is more and more sustainable entrepreneurship.
Really good answer. If I take in some audience questions, so what are the pros and cons of the non-profit versus for-profit entrepreneurship regarding impact? Pretty complex question, but who wants to answer?
Well, maybe I would just say a remark that have nothing against non-profit organizations, but I would say that if you look like how mankind has been going forward during past 1,000 years, probably the profit-oriented companies will in the end be like a dominating part of the welfare creation, and that's why it's maybe the most important thing that the profit-oriented corporates and companies, entrepreneurs will find a way to do it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I more or less, I sort of agree. I think we need both. We have a kind of solid baseline from NGOs, from like governmental work, but it's not sufficient. And basically any improvements in this field can, even in the best case scenarios, be incremental. And because there's also so much resistance towards this, like, that there's so much political movement, towards like cutting, foreign aid and stuff like that. So in that sense, like, we do need something complementary, and there the private sector definitely has a lot to go for them. Corporate social responsibilities, another important area that we definitely need to keep up, and we should incentivize, as much as we can politically. But it's like, as long as it's just, basically a share of profits a company makes somewhere else, that's also like, only, liable to grow incrementally, unless of course the company all of a sudden makes a killing. But in by and large in the corporate world that doesn't happen. Now then, the reason why I think startups are so interesting here is that, first of all, because when you don't have a business model yet and you're open to these ideas, why not look for the business model somewhere where you can actually have an impact where you're doing business? And second of all, because if you want to run a startup, if you want to raise venture capital, you at least ostensibly need to have explosive growth potential. And there, if I think if the change you have in the social ecological problems that you're solving is due to the transactions you have with the target customer, and then you lead this to an explosive growth, then I think the change potential there is massive. It's tangible, and I would really love to see the first sort of European kind of ecological or social decacorn, $10 billion company come out now in the next 10 years. I think the roots are there already, and we may well see that happen soon. So I think that's long and convoluted answer. We need both, but the big sort of explosive potential is in the private sector, and there specifically in startups.
What about you, Eero?
Right. So I think basically Kai and Lauri are right in a sense that we cannot ignore the private sector. We cannot ignore for-profit companies. But I guess maybe reading a bit between the lines here, but the sentiment saying non-profit sustainability versus corporate sustainability. Can you achieve profits and sustainability at the same time? That's I think a trade-off that you don't need to make. Basically, as you said, non-profits making impact in the world, great. Companies not making it, I don't think enough. It's clear that they need to also basically recognize the long-term thing that I was mentioning now, I guess, at 3 points.
Actually, a follow-up question to you, Eero. What is the most rewarding in working for Upright Project? And can you share what kind of attitude is needed in every working life?
What has been the most rewarding? I think there's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of cases where you bang your head against a wall for a while, and then at the end see yourself come up on top. And I think those victories are always great. personally kind of being in charge of model development upright, so basically coming up with the numbers. One kind of constant fear we have is, okay, how do we validate this? Like, how do we know this is right? And one kind of exciting bit was, okay, we worked on this for 4 years now, and we basically said this is how we think we should work and how we think this number should be for. Now, kind of, we finally came up with one way to calibrate. We looked at scope 1, 2, 3 emissions that companies need to report on. It's not basically what we report, but we thought, should be fairly similar. There should be a relationship. We basically found one like this. So like scope 3 emissions, which is very hard to quantify. That's basically the kind of whole end-to-end value chain emissions that your company creates, very hard to quantify. Some companies have now started to do that. And when we looked at like, what can we do in terms of predicting that and what the companies are reporting, seems like how we calculate things is very similar to how kind of the bottom-up scope 3 calculation works. So it's really kind of rewarding to see that kind of the theoretical, nerdy 4-year effort has actually led into something that seems to kind of correspond to reality in a sense. So it gives us a lot of, at least internal credibility and courage.
And this one is for Lauri. So startups are the drivers, but it doesn't mean that only startups can contribute to this. There are more students who are not involved in the startup scene, but they are still willing to contribute to the world and humanity. Do you have anything to share to them?
First of all, that's 100% accurate. So I mean, like, I think we all have the chance to, do things. And I think there's a couple of ways you can contribute. Like, the first one is like, just, be sensible. Like, be mindful about your own net impact. Just like, figure out like, am I doing more good or bad things in life? Then the second thing is like, that if you want to, influence, seek out those opportunities where you actually, can work with, for example, organizations that have a tangible impact, that quantify their impact somehow. Like, that, like, try to be mindful of like, not going after this hand waving stuff that's going on. And then like, I mean, I think like one more thing that like, that most of us can contribute is like, trying to have an open mind and trying to understand this whole phenomenon better, because there's still so many gaps in our understanding. I mean, climate change is pretty much straightforward. Like, there's like such a scientific consensus that it's sort of like, kind of flat earth stuff, like, to start poking holes into that. But there's so many, like, if you start thinking about social issues, like all of these kind of like, other like more intricate like environmental questions, like, then I mean, just like, if you feel pulled towards those things, just try to figure out some questions or conundrums that like, make your heart sing and just like make sense of them. Because like getting more understanding, more data, more, kind of like measurable, like, things out in the field is going to help, all, governments, companies, NGOs and startups alike. So maybe those things would be a good starting point.
How can a student measure their net impact?
Oh wow! That's I mean, that's
Should they like
maybe,
I don't know.
But I don't think there's like kind of like total be all end all solution, unless you guys have that in the works.
We'll see.
What's the prediction of the positive impact of a student in their life cycle? It's quite a hard question, but gross impact for example for climate is easy to calculate. There's like ilmastojalanjälkilaskuri and so forth. For example, Sitra.fi offers that. But I would just want to add to that question that was answered by Lauri very correctly, that also professional-wise, I would say that of course even if startup entrepreneurship is an important and very inspiring field, but of course it's not the only profession where you can add value to sustainable development. Let's say also working inside large corporates, for instance, which are doing a turnaround to sustainable business. It's people who in the end do the things in R&D and also the strategic leadership. Then like being a researcher, for example, in technological field or in commercial field, we need new kind of thinking from universities and research institutions, and not to forget that civil servants, especially in European Commission, if I would be 20 years younger, I probably would at least I would hope that I would have a courage to actually to maybe go to civil servant career, especially to EU or such fields, because even if politicians decide, but we have to take so much energy to this democracy and hassling with publicity that I would argue that think twice before you say no to civil servant career if you want really to make a change. And of course also if you then like to be pushing forward change in people's minds and trying to find support for change, then of course also a political career is something where you can try to.
Yeah, I would actually love to play off that a little bit. Like both of your points, I think are really good, and I think first of all, I mean, no, I don't like off the bat see a way for an individual to quantify their net impact. So, but I think like as an idea, it's still useful. Like, you know, that whenever you face a choice, you can probably more or less evaluate whether that, like, you know, do you recycle or not? Like, you know, do you know, drive a huge car that's like, you know, run on like, you know, I don't know, like smoked up squirrels or something like that, or like, you know, do you drive an electric cars? And so you can make these choices, and whenever you make that choice, you know, be informed, try to figure out like, you know, what are the kind of like, you know, what are the externalities of this choice, like, you know, what happens if I do that, and so on and so forth. So I think we all can do that. And then the other thing is like, you know, that I think I actually like, you know, hit something really, really important in the second bit there. So like, you know, I mean, also corporations can have like massive innovative capability, and like if we have more people go into corporations with the entrepreneurial mindset, and changing the way, like, you know, that now, you know, the whole like car industry is struggling because Elon Musk sort of like, you know, like really showed them how it's done. And but still, like, you know, there's like all of a sudden, like, you know, many of the major car, like, you know, manufacturers have been starting to like, you know, figure out how to navigate that change market. So that's like, you know, that the startup entrepreneurs sort of like, you know, shuffled or disrupted the market, but now the innovative people working for Volkswagen or like, you know, Audi or BMW or Mercedes are figuring out like, you know, we can make amazing cars using this technology, and that requires innovation, entrepreneurial mindset inside the company. So and that's an opportunity for anybody who like, you know, wants to go out there and I think we need more sort of people to go to be kind of quote unquote moles in this company. So like go in there, start pushing things from inside, because if they're able to change those huge ships, first of all, you know, they're doing the world a great favor, and you know, they're doing the companies a great favor as well, because otherwise, you know, like you said previously, like, you know, if they don't, you know, adhere to this new normal that's coming and that's already becoming tangible right now, they're going to run out of business eventually. So either way, I think we're on a good path, because I mean, either these big corporations are able through innovation to change the way they work so that they can be more sustainable, or they're going to go the way of natural selection. At least that's what I'm sort of optimistic about.
Do you have anything to add, Eero?
One thing came into my mind when I was thinking about this while you guys were talking. There's like my favorite quote ever is, "All models are wrong, some are useful." So like if you think about the net impact of individuals, what does that mean? Because you can assign all kinds of different numbers, and the only kind of real question that you should be asking is like, what do I do with that information? So if I were to say, tell that Lauri has a higher net impact than myself, question is like, what is the decision that you make based on that? Besides maybe on Tinder. Really how we should think about this, and I guess we've kind of touched upon that in different manners, is, you know, what is my net impact as a participant in the labor force? What am I working on? Which kinds of ships am I trying to move? What is my impact as a consumer? And those are kind of not similar choices. You don't choose to go to work or buy milk. You choose which milk you buy or which groceries, and then you choose where you work. So kind of quantifying where you work and what you buy is more important than quantifying what your whatever aggregate of that would be as a person.
I hope this gave the audience good takeaways. So, but actually there is a follow-up question from the audience to Eero. About the net impact model. That person says that, can I please get a brief overview of how the algorithms of the net impact model at Upright project works? So how is the progress of the SDGs measured?
Right, that's a very good question. I'll try to be actually brief. I could talk about this for, I guess, 8 hours straight. Basically what we do is kind of where we're innovative is, step one, we build a macroeconomic model of the world in terms of products and services, and we built that solely for the purpose of kind of quantifying sustainability. So it's not like existing tax or whatever taxonomies of products and services, but rather we try to identify what are the kind of reasonable ways to differentiate products in terms of their sustainability. We do a tremendous bit of meta research in terms of like machine reading 200 million literally articles to classify and understand which different products and services cause which different bits of impact. And we basically model companies as portfolios of products and services. So instead of saying the sustainability impact of Philip Morris is whatever small fraction of their revenues they put forward to education, but rather what is it that they're actually building and what is the impact of what is it that they're actually building and selling people. That's how we come up with net impact basically. So looking at research hits for cancer, what kinds of products cause cancer, associating those products with impact, associating tobacco manufacturers with tobacco products, and so on. For the SDGs, we basically look at that on more of kind of a product taxonomy level. So we look at what products and services company are creating, and then understanding what is the likely contribution that those have to the individual goals. So again, it's a bit of a different lens, but leads to similar results.
Great. So just a concluding question to all of you. So how can the young generation stay positive and motivated to solve these SDG related problems? Actually, you don't have to just answer for the young generation, but overall as well. Like, how can you stay motivated to solve these challenges?
Well, even if you might think that nothing is happening and the old guys are not understanding that we must do the change so fast, but 20 years ago, if I would have said for an audience of energy engineers that actually soon investment to wind power mills will be much more profitable without any subsidies than investing in large-scale nuclear power. Everybody would have been laughing, and I myself would have been laughing that this is not possible 20 years ago. And now it's a self without saying. It's self-evident thing that for example, like renewable energy has become the most profitable investment segment inside energy production. And 20 years ago, if I would have said that, okay, in Finland and actually all the Nordic system, the emissions of electricity production will be close to zero, people would have not believed that in the sector. Now it's already happened. 5 years ago, when I was saying that we must abandon burning for heat in Finland, like in 10 to 15 years, people were saying that it's not possible. Helsinki Energia and Fortum here, which are responsible about heating of capital region, were saying that it would lead to massive usage of biomasses if we ban usage of coal and natural gas. Now, 5 years later, they have plans how to do it by 2029. So things are actually proceeding, especially in Nordic region, quite fast. And also China has been rapidly become interested about getting net zero emissions economy by 2060. Of course, it's still 40 years to go, but still tremendous change from 10 years ago when they said that it's actually Westerns who have created this problem and you must fix it. Now they are saying that, okay, it's the capitalists who have created this, but okay, we must fix it. So stay positive. Things change faster than it seems.
Yeah. What about you, Laura?
Well, first of all, I think we shouldn't feel crushed by all of these issues. I mean, we are making progress. Well, not making progress as fast as we should, but we're making progress in many of them. Then I think secondly, we should also be mindful that none of us is going to solve all of these. So losing your sleep over all of these problems in the world, it's just we should kind of put things in scope. But then finally, I mean, I think there's I'm kind of a geek, so I love Marvel references and stuff. Then there's this this Spider-Man rule that with great power comes great responsibility. And those of us who have been given opportunity, we have been given great power. So I think that carries with it a responsibility. And I believe that the best way we can make use of that responsibility is if you can shoot web from your wrists and hang around tall buildings, you should probably go kick some criminal ass. But for the rest of us, I mean, we all have certain skill sets, certain things that we really enjoy doing. So figuring out what is the niche where these types of activities would have the greater impact, whether it's in politics, whether it's in corporate world, whether it's in being a founder, being an academic, but figuring out where you feel that I want to go to work every morning, do this stuff, and how do you juxtapose that or interface that with a maximum amount of impact. If by and large we as a society went and person by person by person solve this simple equation, I think that the net impact of that step alone would already take us so much closer also on the overarching task of solving these pressing issues.
Thank you, Lauri. And then Eero.
Yeah, good answers. Maybe adding on top of Kai's notion of okay, these are tremendously hard problems, but we've kind of had very encouraging success in the recent years. Two more things that I think kind of add at least kind of enthusiasm on my part, like why I kind of chosen to work in this kind of field. Number one is there's clear interest in sustainability and kind of innovation in the sustainability field. Like if you want to raise capital for whatever greenhouse gas reduction program, societal issue, whatever, you're probably going to get that. That's the amount of interest, capital, and kind of will out there is tremendous. So it's really just about yourself picking up the work and just kind of getting on with it. And I guess the last one is more of a stick, in a sense that we can't afford not to work on sustainability. What else at this point? If you start to go work somewhere else where you don't have a sustainability angle, really, we really can't afford to make that choice now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's time to wrap up. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Kai, Lauri, and Eero. The next Unfolding tomorrow will be on the 13th of October. So we'll be discussing more about SDGs. And if you guys found this interesting, bringing the academia and the business side and the government together, then definitely you should sign up to the next one from the Aalto Ventures site. So thank you guys for joining. And yeah, thank you, audience, for listening. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers.